Hi everyone, Fenris Models here, and today we'll be taking a look at the F-15C Eagle from Tamiya in 1/48 scale. Now, while I work on the cockpit in the background here, let me tell you a little bit about this build, seeing as how this video has been a long time coming. Back in January, I entered a group build with a few fellow YouTubers, including Model Minutes, Captain VFC, John Alex Scale Modeling, and Hardy Scale Models. The subject of this group build was for us to build up any F-15 kit we want in any scale, but we were restricted from using the scheme that came in the box. Initially, my intent was to make up a custom scheme for some kind of made-up aircraft. You'll probably notice in the video here that the colors I'm using are far from the correct ones, and, well, this is why. However, it wasn't until after I closed up the cockpit that I decided to instead pick up a set of third-party decals and make an actually existing aircraft, so please excuse the inaccurate cockpit here. Once the paint dried, we can apply the decals. These were carefully trimmed from the sheet and soaked in warm water and slid from the backing paper to the plastic. Once in place, each received some microsol setting solution to help the decals really settle in place. Before the cockpit could be installed between the two fuselage halves, there were two other pieces that needed adding. Well, three, but two were mirror images of each other. They were the left and right air intakes for the engines. The other was the sensor suite in the nose. Then they, along with the cockpit, were sandwiched between the two fuselage halves. While I waited for that to dry, I cemented each wing half together. Then I attached the engine nozzles, the horizontal stabilizers, and the wings to the fuselage. The landing gear bay doors were then attached in the closed position. For this kit, Tamiya does provide a small ledge for these to sit on, though as you can see, it isn't a perfect fit. I just kept it as is, but if that does bother you, you may want to apply some putty to fill in the gaps. This is a 1978 tooling after all. Next was the base of the canopy frame. This received a coat of model color black, 70.950 before getting the canopy glass installed. Before I could fully close up the fuselage, I still needed to get in there with the injection seat and, more importantly, the pilot. The seat was coated in that same black, and the seat cushion was painted in model color US olive drab 71.043. This was set aside to dry, and while I waited, I attached the nose cone and the vertical stabilizers. And then the seat was cemented in place. For the pilot, I gave the entire figure a coat of mecha color gray-green 69.014. Model Air USAF Green 71.124 was used to pick out his shirt and the pads on his knees and groin area. The straps and air hose then received a coat of Model Air USAF Olive Drab 71.016. For the helmet, I used Model Air USAF Light Gray 71.276. I find that for white, often this light gray actually works a little bit better than just straight white. Unless the item needs to be like a stark bright white, I tend to opt for this light gray, and I think it worked great here. And then the visor and boots were picked out in model color 70.950 black. This was set aside to dry, and then the body was given a wash of Athonian camo shade from Citadel. The pilot was then cemented in place. And from there we can then close up the canopy. Once the cement dried, I masked the canopy with some Tamiya masking tape. Now at this point, I'm sure the eagle-eyed of you have noticed there is a relatively large seam along the fuselage below the canopy. No matter how hard I tried, I could not prevent that gap from forming with the cement alone, so I broke out the old Tamiya basic type putty. This was thinned down with some Tamiya Extra Thin and then applied with a toothpick. The Extra Thin applicator brush was then used to feather out the putty and blend it in place. While the putty set up and cured, I got to work on the missiles and drop tanks. You'll notice I didn't mention the included ECM pod though. That's because I completely missed the step when assembling the wings where I needed to cut out a slot for those to be installed with. It's annoying, but I wasn't about to try to tear the wings apart just to get in there for that. Everything went together pretty easily. The fuel tanks were simply two halves cemented together, and the missiles just needed the fins put on. Tamiya engineered this quite well, and I had zero issues getting the fins to sit at sharp 90-degree angles. Two of the drop tanks also had two sidewinders added to the pylon as well. And then the four Sparrows were cemented to the underbelly of the Eagle. Once the putty was fully cured, it was time to start painting. Similar to my previous F-18 Super Hornet build, I opted to use a black base and marbling technique for my pre-shading here. I don't think this is a technique I'll really use for 1/72 models, but in my opinion the payoff is worth it in 1/48 scale. So to start, the entire plane was given a coat of model color black. Then it was time for the marbling. For this, I like to cut the pressure down, remove the nozzle cap from the airbrush, and get in even closer to the model than I normally do. Model Air Insignia White 71.279 was used for this. The technique is easy, if a little tedious. Each panel gets a random, messy, squiggly pattern of paint applied. It's important to keep the paint from the edges of the panel here. We're mainly focused on the centers of each. I simply went over the entire plane with this, hitting each and every panel with some of the paint. And I do mean every panel. It does take some time, but the final result will be worth it. The nozzle cap was replaced, the PSI turned back up to my normal setting, and then using a light hand I applied a coat of Dark Ghost Gray 71.120. It's imperative here that you don't fully cover all of that work we just did. We do want some of that previous layer to still show through. As you can see in the footage here, this gives the impression of worn metal and makes it feel a little more realistic while also drawing the eye subtly to the various panel lines all over the plane. The patterning on the top side was freehand drawn using neutral gray 71.051. I first draw the shape of it and then fill it in, making sure to blend nicely where the line is. And then the engine portion in the back here receives some model color gunmetal gray 70.863. Make sure to get this paint thinned properly. Between the metallic flakes in the paint and the fact that it's the unthinned model color line, this stuff can be a nightmare to spray if you don't. I like to use Vallejo's airbrush thinner 71.161, adding 1 drop of thinner for every 4 drops of paint in my cup. And then the nose was coated in medium gunship gray 71.097. The fuel tanks were also given a coat of the Dark Ghost Gray. Each sidewinder was brushed in insignia white, as was each Sparrow. In retrospect, I really should have sprayed each missile before attaching them, but once they were in place, I really didn't see a way to get around having to hand paint them. While it can be a pain to have to brush, but if you have each layer thinned and you take your time, you can build the color to a nice bright opacity. The model was taken outside and given a coat of Mr. Super Clear Gloss from a rattle can in preparation for decals. As I had mentioned at the beginning of this video, I grabbed some third-party decals from Furball Aero Design. Although interestingly, these are technically printed by Cartograph. I guess they contracted out to Cartograph for the printing or something. Either way, these definitely went down well the way that Cartograph does. Simply soak them in warm water and they slide off the backing paper no problem. I did also use some of the Tamiya decals for some of the stenciling that wasn't in the third-party stuff, and you could tell the difference. All in all, there was 173 decals that were applied to this kit. and applying them all made such a difference. Even if the stars and bars kind of disappeared on the wing here. Any of the larger decals were given a coat of microsol to help conform to the details of the kit. For the panel lines, I opted to use Tamiya's panel line accent color brown. I chose brown over the usual black because I didn't want the panels to stand out too much. With that pre-shading we did earlier, the black would have just looked a little more exaggerated than I wanted with this kit. Plus, we'll be able to use the brown for some faux weathering as we clean up the excess panel wash. For the cleanup, I like to use Artist's White Spirit. I make sure as I do to wipe in the direction of either airflow or gravity depending on what makes more sense for that surface. Any residual panel wash will get smeared in a realistic direction and give that slightly grimy look we're looking for. As I'm not one to be overly weathering my kits, I'm quite happy with this effect. And then we can add on the remaining fuel tanks and missiles. A quick spray of Tester's Dull Coat for a matte varnish, and then we can pull the canopy mask off. I did have a little bit of leakage around the edges, which was easily cleaned up by softly rubbing it with a cocktail stick. Once I was happy with how the frame looked, I called this one done. And there we go, Tamiya's F-15C in 1/48 scale. Despite this one taking me over half a year to complete, I'm actually very happy with it. It's far from perfect, it's an old tooling and it reminds you of that every now and again, but I've also seen worse on some kits from the current decade, so... And as I mentioned at the start of this video, this was for a group build with a few other YouTubers. I'll link to the channels that have completed theirs in the description below, so make sure you check them out as well. I love what all of them have done with theirs, and I think you will too. But what did you think of mine here? Did you enjoy the video? Even if not, please leave a comment letting me know what you thought, good or bad. Thank you Cali Bear and all of my starter set patrons. Your support is invaluable and keeps this channel going. And thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and all of that stuff that the Eldritch algorithm loves to see. It really does help the channel grow. If you're interested in directly aiding the channel, maybe share this video with a friend that you think would enjoy it. We're roughly 100 subscribers away from the big 1K mark, and it's only through your aid that we're going to make it there. If you enjoyed this video and want to watch more of my content, how about checking out my build of the F-22 Raptor, or my build of the F-18 Super Hornet. In any case, remember to stay safe and keep modeling.